Tim Goldstein, autistic adult, and your host for Life in a Neurotypical Universe, where we take a look at life from the perspective of an autistic adult. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Life in a Neurotypical Universe. Welcome our guest today, Shelly Dival. Shelly Dival has a company called Enabling Spaces, where she is a building designer. And not only she is a building designer, but she is an autism design specialist and one of the few in the world. As we talk with Shelly, you're going to learn how it is she got involved with autism and how there's all these different aspects of building design that can help not just the autistic people, but help everybody. I think you'll find it interesting and learn about some things that you never knew.
But yes, it's interesting, like you say, getting everyone onto the same page at a national level is pretty important. So
I would say it's important across the whole autism community, and that's part of the problem we have in the autism community. You know,
yes.
I kind of always joke about it, saying that, you know, being autistic, one of the things that we tend to have deficiencies in is those social bonds and social pieces. The problem is we really have our own culture. We just don't have enough social skills to make that culture come together where you can see it.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, you know better than me. How do you get a common thing with autism? Because there's such a variation. My grandson has autism and Down syndrome. And one of her best friends who has 4 children on the spectrum and one that is also Down syndrome. And they quite often feel like they're in their own little group because that mix of Down syndrome and autism has its own different little quirks, you know. So they sometimes not sure which camp they fit into. So it's interesting, and it's particularly interesting in the work that I do. So.
Are you familiar with Judy Singer?
No.
She's from down under. I'm not sure which state, but she's from down there, and she's autistic, and she's the person that coined the term and terminology of neurodiverse and neurodiversity.
Okay.
And that is how I actually kind of approach all of this, is from the standpoint of neurodiversity, not so much as autism. I mean, my particular perspective in it is mostly an autistic perspective, but I recognize that what we're really talking about are people who perceive and process the world differently than the majority of the people perceive and process the world. And whether it's Downs or ADHD or OCD or autism, the reality is they all tend to intermingle. When you have one, you tend to have at least lots of traits of the other ones, if not full blown.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
So I try to take it more about it as neurodiversity, so that we're not trying to get into that, oh, I'm the Downs group, oh, I'm the autism group, oh, how about we're the group of people that don't quite think the same as the rest of the culture, which means that we're constantly having to struggle because we're essentially the outcasts. We don't follow the rules very well because we don't understand them.
You know, and I'm actually all for not following the rules, because otherwise we don't get innovation, we don't get you know, diversity in terms of not just people but different, you know, artwork. I mean, imagine, you know, for instance, if everyone was the same, and say, for instance, all the artists thought alike, imagine how boring artwork would be. You know, imagine how boring the world would be without all of these unique differences that make up every single person on this planet, you know. So it's all about neurodiversity.
So well, once you get into looking at it from the neurodiversity spectrum, the neurodiversity isn't saying that we're different from other humans in any aspect other than we just have a perception and processing that's far enough away that you'll notice a difference. But neurotypicals, which is what we refer to everybody else, neurotypicals are on they're in that neuro cloud, I refer to it as, just as well. And
Yes.
essentially you have all of these different, the way I explain it is, think of this cloud that's full of just glitter and confetti that's kind of floating around, with each one representing a way a person can perceive and process. And if you're going to
Yes.
go and group them, you're going to end up with this one group that kind of, is similar, and that's
Yes.
neurotypicals. And then you're going to have a
Yeah.
bunch of outliers that they may have subgroups within them, the Downs, the ADHD, the just weird character, who knows what. Um, but the whole thing is it's intermixed. It's not that you have a trait out in the neurodiverse area that doesn't exist in the neurotypical area. We
Yeah.
tend to look at it as an autism trait. It's a Downs trait. I
Yeah.
say it's a human trait, because we can find neurotypicals that display any one of those traits, just not enough of them that they would have that condition.
Yes, and I actually love how you describe it as a cloud. I think that I absolutely love it. It covers, like you say, everything, and because nothing is linear. Whereas so I think a cloud represents it really, really well.
Well, especially because there's this, it really came down to, I was thinking about it, and my background and career for the last, I don't know, couple decades has been in the
Yeah.
IT industry, and my specialty is in data. So I was thinking about it from kind of how would you record, the data? How would you visualize it? How would you represent it, that way?
Yeah.
And and the reality is it's a very multivariant kind of thing.
Mm.
And when you take any multivariant thing, I mean, it's, we're definitely going to get into talking more about buildings and style and such, which is your expertise, but it's the same thing you're dealing with. You've got a
Mm.
ton of variables. You can't put that
Yes.
on a single line and say, do you want it accommodating or not accommodating, and think there's one line.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, with the neurodiversity, there's so many different requirements. And with architecture, there's so many different solutions to a single design brief. So the two, it's very much a fluid process, I think, is probably the best way to describe it, because there is no one solution, there is no one size fits all. So it makes it very interesting. And that's the same with any clients that I've had over the years, is that no one person, no one family is the same. And they quite often come to me and say, oh, we want 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a lounge room, or this. They'll reel off the rooms that they want. And I go, okay, well, why do you want those spaces? And, how does your life work? And what hobbies do you have? And do you have great grandma's piano you need to fit in? Oh, everyone is a musician. Okay, well, we actually need a bit more space in the house for that. So people don't think about how they live and what they do, and I draw that out of them, and to be able to really design something that suits them. So designing for neurodiversity can be more complex, of course, with challenging behaviours that some people have, but at the same time it's about getting the right brief and then knowing how architecture can assist that. So that's the way I see it anyway.
No, that makes perfect sense. What we keep finding out in so many different areas of the neurodiverse world as it intersects with the neurotypical world. And
Yeah.
I obviously do a lot of work in the autism at work, neurodiverse at work type arena. And what we keep
Yes.
finding is there's nothing that is special that you need to do for a neurodiverse person that wouldn't help a neurotypical. It's just that the
Absolutely.
neurotypicals often cover up very well, so you don't notice that whatever is causing a problem, whereas the
Yeah.
neurodiverse person is the canary in the coal mine that is going to
Yes.
say right away that these lights, I can't stand them, and everybody else
Yes.
is just going to sit there with the glare and blink and, be all foggy-eyed all night, but never say
Yes.
anything about it.
Absolutely. And people with that suffer with epilepsy or migraines can certainly tell you about lighting as well. So you're absolutely right. Things that we can design for neurodiverse absolutely helps everyone else as well. There's actually no downside to looking at how we design for neurodiversity at all.
I think it's very much like any other area of diversity. When you reach out and embrace another area of diversity, you get a richer environment yourself. And because
Yeah.
now you're questioning more of the details and pieces, because you know you're dealing with people that may respond to items that you normally wouldn't think that hard about, you're going to bring those additional choices to the neurotypical also. So now they get
Yes.
more choices. Not only, does it help one side, it gives the other side more choice too. Maybe it doesn't hurt them, but maybe they just
Yeah.
enjoy it better when somebody says, how would you
Enjoy
like
it.
the color of these
Absolutely.
lights?
It's a nicer space to be in. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, one thing I'm dying to ask you about is on LinkedIn, you have the initial CF after your name. And
I do.
I'm always curious about initials after names when they get past the 5 that I understand.
So the CF stands for Churchill Fellow. Which is a organisation that was set up after the death of Sir Winston Churchill, obviously the British Prime Minister, and famously for during the war, the Second World War years. So before he passed away, he was actually asked how he'd like to be remembered, and he said that he actually didn't want a statue because he thought the birds would poop on him, which actually he has now got a statue. And the birds do poop on his head. But he said that he thought something like a Rhodes Scholar, but something that was open to anyone from any walk of life and any educational status, to give people the chance to learn and share information. So upon his death, there were several countries, and in fact the US set up a slightly different organisation to what Britain and Australia has set up, and New Zealand has a small one as well. But here in Australia, it was set up. It was actually the largest door knock appeal in the history of Australia. And even now, when you equate it back, it was millions of dollars raised in one day. And banks actually, only time ever in history, banks were opened on a Sunday so they could deposit all this money.
Oh, wow.
So that was in 1965. And first Churchill Fellows were awarded, I think, about 14 or 15. And back then they were overseas for 12 months. So the fellowships are all about research that new ideas, innovative ideas, a gap in the knowledge base here in Australia in a particular field, and having the opportunity to travel overseas and do research and then bring that knowledge back to Australia. So some of the requirements, why do we need to go overseas? What's the gap? How can Australian society benefit? Apart from all the usual, are you an Australian citizen and all the rest of it. So I applied because there was essentially zero expertise here about designing for autism. So I applied and managed to get one in the first year I applied. Sometimes it takes more than one go, but I was very lucky in getting it the first time. And so I was overseas for a couple of months last year researching, and now I can put CF after my name.
And that's where, when you get the download paper that's on your website, that's when you went
Yes.
out and actually went and visited all the sites that were pictured of the different
Yes.
autism-friendly.
And more. The case studies, and I met with. So essentially, look, going back a step, I guess, how it all started was I'm a building designer. So here in Australia, I've got a different education to what architects have, and I'm not a registered architect, but I practice under the term building designer, and there's lots of us. So I've been a building designer for over 20 years, and then I have 6 beautiful grandchildren, but my eldest grandson was born with Down syndrome, and when he was 7, so about 4 or 5 years ago, he was diagnosed with autism. So we'd really been concentrating on the Down syndrome side of it, and then suddenly this autism, and it was like, what is autism? And while I had friends and some cousins with children with autism, because they were all very different, so I really didn't know anything about autism. So I did what everyone does, and I Googled, and I came across some work by George Braddock, who is an architect in the States, and he and another architect did a paper on autism in the built environment in the home, and that was my aha moment. That was my light bulb moment. I thought, of course, our built environment affects us in so many ways. Why wouldn't it affect people that have, the sensory sensitivities more than it affects us? So then it became a bit of an obsession with me. And after work, I would sit in front of the TV or, wherever with my laptop or my iPad, and I would just be researching. And that's when I realised that no one was doing anything here in Australia. There's one architect in Melbourne, to be fair, he concentrates more on schools, and he's done some brilliant work, but that was about it. So then I thought, well, I have to get overseas and see these people and talk to them and look at the buildings. So that's then when I found the Churchill Trust, and I applied for the fellowship. So it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And particularly as I'm self-employed, I wouldn't have got that opportunity without that support. So yes, I travelled through the US, Denmark, the Netherlands, the UK and France, and I spoke to architects and designers. I spoke to researchers and different organisations, the National Autistic Society in the UK, couple of places in the US. I spoke to Deborah Cowdy at 29 Acres in Dallas, who they're doing developing a residential setting for adults on the spectrum, and Denise Resnick at First Place in Arizona in Phoenix. So wonderful, wonderful people that I met, and such a diverse group of people as well. So I got information sort of from every angle. So from the organisational point of view and what people are doing in developing that, from a research point of view in not just autism but in different fields. So I met with a vision scientist, and that was interesting because our vision affects us so much as well. And so that excuse the pun, but that was a real eye-opener. It really added a different dimension to the way I thought about things. And I looked at schools and, spoke to, different people about designing different types of buildings as well. So it was massive. I travelled, like I say, for a couple of months, and it was exhausting, and it was brilliant, and it really gave me a different perspective and added depth to what I'd already been researching. So and has given me such wonderful friendships and contacts, professional contacts as well. So so that was my last year. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds like it was an amazing year.
It was amazing.
You said something that I wanted to kind of go back to, which was you'd mentioned how designing for people who have sensory sensitivities. And
yes,
what I wanted to mention that a lot of people don't know, I had the opportunity to get to know a gentleman that at one point was the executive director of the STAR Institute, which is on sensory processing disorder. And what he tells me is that 80% of people that have autism do have sensory processing disorder, which we know that autistic people, there's a lot of issues with smells and colors and lights and sounds and all different senses. But what I found super interesting was there are studies and research all show that there's only 20% of the people with sensory processing disorder that are autistic. So in other words, 80% of the people that have sensory issues are not autistic, but they don't say anything about it like we do.
Which again goes back to what we were discussing earlier about there's no downside to, sort of learning these design techniques and how to design buildings. It's good for everyone. And certainly part of my study too, I met with a researcher in Worcester in the UK. She was researching in with autism children in a school setting. She's now working in dementia research, and there's a lot of crossover with cognitive function with dementia and autism. So I found that interesting, and that really opened up the idea of we're not just designing for autism. And like you say, there's so many people with other conditions that don't say anything, or they're perhaps probably a really bad way to say it, but not flavour of the month, so to speak, in terms of publicity and what people are trying to do. So they do go under the radar a bit, but with this type of design, it can help all those people that might not necessarily come forward and say that they have issues with things. So,
well, oftentimes they don't even know that they have issues because, I mean, how many times does somebody come up to you and tell you that you're hearing too loud or you're hearing too softly? They don't know.
Yeah.
And you just know
Yes.
that's what you say here. So you don't
Yeah.
really question it. You just say, well, I guess that's the volume that things come in at.
And colour as well.
Right.
My own mother, we were talking one day and she was saying what colour their car was, and we're all going, no, it's not. And she obviously sees colour quite different. And of course, then you've got the more colour blindness, that which affects men more than women.
1 out of 12 men. I just looked it up because I was at an offsite for a tech company that I work with.
Yeah.
And they went and showed the series of slides that they were putting together for being major presentations they were going to use. And they had things such as dark yellow with light yellow letters on top of it, things that even having no color blindness were difficult to read. So I went and pulled up the statistics because it was a bunch of geeks. So you got to have, facts for geeks.
Yeah.
And what I said to them was, I sure hope that you're using this deck to pitch a bunch of women, because you've got a 1 in 12 chance that the guy you're talking to is going to think you're idiots because he has no clue how to read it. And in women, it's only 1 in 200. You got a lot better, chance of having somebody that can actually see what you're putting up there.
Yes, and then add to those stats with an ageing population, where generally our sight and our colour perception changes as well. So I've got to say that with the research that I've done, it has absolutely opened up my whole world of so many different areas that I think as designers and architects, we go through our training and it's all very standard training. I mean, we do need to know about codes and building codes and construction and engineering, because that's important. We don't want buildings to fall down. But until we get into a specialty like this, I guess we don't tend to start looking at some of the other things that we should have always been taking into account, and such as vision. I've become very much aware of it, in the colours that are used and how we put patterns together, which was one of the things that we talked about with Uta Leonards, the vision scientist at Bristol Uni. Patterns and that can really affect people, again, and not just neurodiverse but neurotypical as well, because and then it was interesting actually. She said that she wants to get away from the terminology of autism friendly or dementia friendly, because she said that she could probably make an environment where everyone was disabled just through vision.
Right. It's true though.
Yeah. It was very interesting, and it comes down to our brain, and so neuroscience also starts to come into play with how we design buildings and create the spaces as well, because how do our brains work? And everyone's brains, not just a small section of the population or a certain demographic. It's how does our brain relate to certain colours, patterns, light, even height, different ceiling heights and room spaces, and acoustics, of course, is a huge thing. So how does our brain relate to all of that just on an everyday level? And that just, it's such a huge thing to consider. And then on top of that, of course, people with the sensory issues. So,
right. The height
yeah,
thing is interesting. You mentioned height. When my wife and I bought the house that we currently live in, we'd been shopping around at a bunch of different homes. And
yeah,
we just walked in this one and just knew it was the right one. And it took us,
yeah,
I don't know, it probably took us a couple of years to figure out what was it about this one that was different that just made it feel so right. And it was
yeah,
when you walk in the front door, the right main area is a living room on the left and office area on the right. Well, the whole living room and the stairway going upstairs and everything is cathedral ceiling all the way to the second story. So it was the
yeah,
room, the volume. When you walked in, it was just this open, expansive space. And we didn't
yes,
realize that it was that feeling was what made it feel the way it did versus
yeah,
everything else walking in more traditional home with 8 foot or so so what, roughly
but
2.5 meter 2.25 meter tight walls.
yeah, yeah. And so let me ask you a question then. So you've got that lovely feeling in that double vaulted ceiling area, and so when you go into other areas like your bedroom or areas that might have a standard ceiling height, does your mood or your feeling change in response to that, the different way that the architecture's been designed in those areas?
I won't say that I notice it particularly. On the other hand, I haven't been trying to pay attention to it particularly. We do tend to get a little focused on what we're doing and not necessarily
Yes,
recognize those things that are outside of the focus. So no,
yes,
I don't really notice that at all, but I do notice it when I walk into a space. When I walk from the outdoors
yes,
in,
mm,
then
yeah,
I think there's just such a shocking difference from, the wherever the clouds in the sky compared to an
yes,
indoor area. That
yes,
higher volume gives me more of that. I'm a big outdoors person, so I think it just gives me more of that spacious, outdoor, openy kind of feel. But once I'm
yeah.
inside, there's just not enough height
Yeah,
difference, I think,
look,
to kick it off.
and look, I'm absolutely the same. I'm very much an outdoorsy person. I grew up on a farm, and so I hate places that are closed in and don't have the doors or windows to look out and things like that. But the reason I was asking you was because when I was in Denmark, I was looking at a couple of projects in Denmark. One was a seniors house, and different demographic again in terms of design. But what they work very closely with an architect to develop. The people I spoke to were specialist area autism. So it was a government department, which also made me very excited because there was a government department in any country that was being very innovative and prepared to do the research and try new things. So that was exciting for a start. And they work very closely with an architect who designs therapeutic spaces for all sorts of people recovering from cancer and autism and things like that. But what they found with their research was that people are very comfortable, and again, this comes back to our mind and perhaps our history. Very comfortable. The different height ceilings created a different feeling for different rooms. So the more communal areas they did with higher ceilings and raised ceilings, and then they used the ceiling space to bring it down in the bedroom areas because people then felt cocooned and felt safer. So they found that changing ceiling heights and then also use of colour can give people a sense of openness or safety and being in that cocoon. And the interesting thing that they did in the seniors' house with the individual apartments, they put wardrobes on the wheels, so that what the residents had the choice of doing was dividing off a bedroom area so that it was a separate space with that lower ceiling, or some of them opened it up so they had their bed was like in one studio apartment. And so
Wow.
it gave each individual a choice on where they wanted to furnish their room and how they wanted to work their own space. So really interesting seeing that design and using height of ceilings and walls and shapes like that in a building to create choices and different feelings in those different spaces.
It's amazing. You just don't think of all the different elements coming together to make those effects. Basically colors we think of, but we don't think about them in really fine grained levels of, does this kind of color work well for somebody who maybe is colorblind?
Mm,
I mean,
yeah.
do they want to walk into a room that looks gray all the time to them? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know, but sure seems like a good idea to ask if you knew.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, you very good point. It is about the asking and including the people that you're designing for in that decision making. And that is like any client, The difficulty is with, say, for instance, my grandson, who is 11 now, and he's still not verbal. I say still not verbal because he says a few words, and he relies on technology to communicate, but it's limited in what someone else puts into his iPad.
Mm.
So it's very difficult, other than observing him with certain things, to know what he loves. Now, we know certain things that he loves. He loves music and dancing, and he loves his brother and sister, and obviously his mum and dad. He loves the family dogs, and he loves soccer, and he loves boxing, which Alex found out that's my daughter, when they were at the gym one day, and he just gravitated towards the boxing lessons, and so now he does boxing. And so we know that by observation and just knowing him as we do. But how do we know how he wants, what colour does he want his bedroom? What does he personally want in that space? We don't. It's actually one of my little things that, in my spare time, I want to try and develop an app or something like that where we can communicate, specifically around building design, so we can communicate better with people that have difficulty communicating, so that we can find out what they want, give them a choice of colours, somehow get that palette of colours and narrow things down for them, find out what they want in their spaces, because everyone has their own personal preferences, as well as the things that we know will help from a health point of view. But designing for them as people, as humans, everyone has their loves and, dislikes. So it's really important to ask people. It's how do we ask the people that can't communicate as well as others? So
Right, that definitely adds a big level of challenge, because you're talking about sometimes relatively subtle differences, and
yes.
how do you communicate that with somebody who is nonverbal and just using,
Yeah.
as you say, through technology, but only with what somebody has put in for them, which probably doesn't mean building design.
Exactly. But that's what makes up, particularly in homes, and I guess I'm talking more about homes now, particularly in homes, it's their own space. It's, the saying, our home is our castle, and we want to do what we want to do in our home. But as children and even adults who have difficulty communicating for whatever reason, it's very difficult to find out what they want to do, and they deserve their own space. They deserve to have the things that they love there. And it's something that designers and carers and anyone in that support circle, we have to be very mindful of, because while everyone has the best intentions, we've got to be really careful that we consult whoever we're designing for and try and find out what their preferences are.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true of everything. Don't assume just because you're an expert in area X, that means that what's right for the other person. Now, you may be able to bring them a lot more choices and help them make better decisions with your expertise, but it doesn't mean that you can decide for them.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's been a lot of times when I've given choices to clients, and as a professional designer, I believe that one option is better than the other, but they've chosen to go the other way because that's what they like. And you go, great, that is your home, so that's how we're going to do it. And like you say, it's about giving people choice, and then it's up to them. It's their home, it's their money, it's them that's going to live there, not me. So I don't have the right to tell them, even though I feel from a design point of view, perhaps another option might have been better in terms of design, but it's not better for them personally.
Right.
So I have no right to impose my opinions on them.
it's like we had talked a little bit earlier about perception and how you perceive different things. It's the old philosophical question of how do I know the red I see is the same red you see?
Yeah.
And, it's very possible that they do see whatever it was you were showing them. Maybe it was because of the colors is what was making it feel to you it didn't quite go right. But maybe they saw the colors in a slightly different palette is how they processed them. To them, it was the other way around.
Absolutely, and it's right for them. So
I know with color is one of those things that with my wife, it drives me crazy. I like to say that I'm not colorblind. I am color agnostic, I guess we'll say. I just don't pay attention to it. I mean, I do like when I, buy clothes for outdoors and such. I like buying bright colors and things like that. But I don't particularly pay attention to color on a normal basis. If you ask me what color the car was that just drove by, I'd probably tell you the model and such. But the color, I'm not sure I'd pick up on. But my wife is just super. I mean, she shows me two shades that look identical and tell me that they're different and undertones are different. And I'm going, I just can't get it. And I happen to have been reading a science article and found out that females, a certain percentage of them, actually have two different color red receptors in their eyes so that they can see two different colors of red. So they have 4 color receptors instead of 3. And the ones that have 4 color receptors can see colors and gradations in colors that people that have 3 can't, because they have that extra, I guess bandwidth you'd call it or something. But they do see colors differently. So I swear my wife is one of those people. She can, we're, my daughter, myself, everybody else is looking at them going, they look the same. And she's going, no, they're different. So I understand the color thing can.
Is it? Yeah. Very interesting. I learn something new every day.
Yes, there you go. There's another one of those little crazy things. Well, if we take building design and we move it a little bit into the workplace, which I know that's not really your specialty per se, but on the other hand, it's just a matter of putting a bunch of humans together in one place versus spreading them out a little bit more.
Yeah, it is. And look, you do treat workplaces differently than homes. Commercial design versus residential is very different in all sorts of ways. And when you're talking about the workplace, and particularly for people with, let's say, neurodiversity with sensory issues and communication and socialising challenges, then there are some things that we can do. And when you're looking at so public buildings and workplaces, we do need to be a little bit more general with it, because we can't really hone in on the specifics for a particular person or family like we can in a home. So you can't go changing the workplace every time someone new comes to work there. That would be lovely, but it's a little impractical. So looking at some of the things, and lighting is probably the biggest, and we touched on that earlier. Lighting can have a huge impact on people.
Right. And when you're in the commercial space, usually there's only one factor that the commercial operators want to know about lighting. And that is, how much energy does it burn for how much light it puts out? They really just want to know cost. They don't really care whether it's red, whether it's white, whether it's yellowish. That's not the concern.
Yeah. And we have in our codes in Australia, we have certain light levels that you have to achieve as well. So, and plus the energy efficiency, so it can get complicated doing the lighting, but certainly keeping away from fluorescent lights is the number one thing, which are being phased out anyway because of the energy efficiency. But even, I believe, some of the, and of course it's hard for me because lights don't affect me per se. I mean, yes, I could get a headache from working in an area for too long, but I don't see that flickering and that sort of thing with the lighting like other people do.
Yeah, I'm not affected by that trade either. The screens and such don't bother me.
Yeah, and look, I'll do a little bit of name dropping here. So recently I had the opportunity to attend a small private function here in Australia, and Temple Grandin was presenting. And I had the chance to talk to her about a writing centre that I'm designing for horsepower, which they were called Writing for the Disabled, which everyone would be familiar with that term, and they've rebranded to Horsepower, which is a much better name for it. And they provide all sorts of writing programs for people with disability. And so we managed to spend a few minutes with Temple talking about the plans for the writing centre. And it was one of the things that she said, that she doesn't suffer from any issues with lighting either. And she said some of the LEDs can also cause problems. But as she said, the only way you can tell is, she said, get someone in who is affected by lighting and test out different lighting before you put it in a building. And so that was interesting because, and again, going back to asking the people that we're designing for, but like she said, she couldn't tell. I mean, and she knows so much about autism, of course, but she couldn't say anything about the lighting because it doesn't affect her. So I think the lighting's really important, and that's the number one thing. And the other thing is the acoustics as well. And everyone.
Now you've hit upon my my hot button. Is back when I used to manage a IT department, the rule is if I heard a radio, it was not going to live past the end of the day. Now you can put your headphones on and listen to it as loud as you want. I don't care. But that radio playing just off in the distance, the edge of where I can hear it, is like ripping my brain out of my head. I can't concentrate on anything at that point. Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's times where I'm quite happy to work with, and I work from home, and I have an office space in Perth as well, but I generally work from home, so I can have my music as loud as I like. And there's some days that's great, and other days, no. Total silence is what I need. So that sort of background noise, I guess, or in-your-face noise, depending on how loud someone's playing the music, that can be a real factor as well. And when you think about a workplace, other areas that can be noisy is the staff kitchen, or where there is maybe an intersection of circulation spaces. So this is where the people gather, and the photocopier and the printer. So all of these areas where people gather and tend to chat, and, there's cups clanging and, fridge doors going.
I did find, I've worked as a consultant for 14 years, 15 years. I've been in and out of a huge number of companies. And I actually found those spaces that you're describing as the ones nobody wants, by the copy machine, by the door where people walk in and talk. Those are the places to sit, because you know everything that's going on in the place all the time, and you know everybody.
That's it. Near the toilet door. You don't want to be anywhere near the toilet door.
But then you get to know everybody. It's just the perfect place to sit, actually.
Well, it's interesting. I guess some people, the extroverts would love to sit there. I would be too distracted. I would talk to everyone, and I wouldn't get any work done.
I do talk to everyone and don't get any work done, but that's, the thing is when I need to get something done now, though, I actually know people throughout the company of who to go to, versus most people who stay in their own department. And then it's, who do I talk to in accounting? Well, let's see, there's these 5 different people I know. What do you want to get done in accounting?
Yes. And that's very true, but when we're talking about sensory issues, then of course those places are generally the places that people want to avoid.
Right.
And so one of the important things in a workspace, I think, is providing choice and having an employer who understands about choice. And so have a different setup of desk spaces. So I think throughout the world there's been, years ago, there was the trend towards open plan workplaces.
What do you mean years ago?
Well, yes, it is still happening.
Maybe it's died over there, but it's going full blown over here.
Oh, that's a shame, because that is the worst thing, I think. I mean, in some ways it's nice, but in other ways it's quite difficult. And we're finding now places are designing in breakout areas or quiet, like meeting rooms areas. So if you need to make a phone call that you don't want everyone else to listen into, then you can go into this space. I mean, in some ways it doesn't make sense to me to create, like the old typing pool type, open space. And let me tell you that the desk petitions that are only, so high that you can still sort of peer over the top to the next person, they don't cut down much noise from one workspace to another. So having a variety of work areas, I think, is really important. So have some of that in open plan, but then make sure that there's other areas that have been provided so that there's more privacy, away from those traffic flow areas, away from the noisy areas, but also just away from other workers. And I think the biggest and number one thing with workplaces is about giving people choices. And that's probably something that is really forgotten in designing workspaces. And while there'll be a lot of workspaces that'll have their offices in one area, and then you'll have the kitchen and the staff room, and you'll have perhaps different seating that people are starting to put in lounge chairs or casual chairs, not just dining chairs. That's great, but it's all still, I find, generally in one big open area. What needs to happen is that those areas need to be split up a little bit and to provide different types of spaces for people to choose. I mean, yes, you want to sit with a group, there's a group. If you just want that quiet corner around the corner from everyone else, where it's just a little bit quieter, I think that would be really beneficial to absolutely everyone. So it's that choice in how people work, in terms of where the desk is situated and the areas that they're in. But the other thing is providing choice in furniture. So people with tactile sensitivities, one size fits all office chair doesn't always work. It's about finding out what someone wants and ordering the right chair for them. I mean, everyone talks about the ergonomics, which is obviously really important, but what about the type of chair? Instead of just saying, well, here's all the office chairs, you can pick one or you can pick the other one that's exactly the same. That doesn't work either. So, have choices, fabric or leather or whatever it might be, because people, can have those different sensitivities. So I think it's about just being really sensitive to providing some choice without, no, you can't go overboard, because from a budget point of view for any business, that's not possible. But providing a choice and looking at how the workplace is designed.
Unfortunately, I don't feel like we're doing or going in that direction. I feel overall that in the workplace, we're hoping that computers are going to be so smart, they're going to figure out the perfect way to do it, and then that's what you get. And even if they're not perfect in figuring it out, they're still what you get.
Unfortunately, I think it's that's the challenge for us, isn't it? The challenge is to just keep talking about it and talking about the benefits of a differently designed workspace. It's about changing the mindset of the industry, because at the end of the day, clients will be led by what their architect or designer says to them.
Right.
While the client's in the riding seat, in one area, for instance, if they said, really want you to bring a autism design consultant in on this project, then the architect will. But after that, generally, the design experts, the architect, the designer, the engineers, everyone, they basically recommend to the client, and very often the client will accept what that expert is telling them. So I think that's the challenge, is to educate the design fraternity in a different way of designing.
I think that's the challenge we have, and definitely with your grandson, you've seen that. The issue is just plain lack of awareness. It's not lack of concern. It's not lack of caring. It's not lack of wanting to do something about whatever this is. It's just lack of even knowing about it. So Shelley, if somebody was interested in talking to you, engaging you for design work, or maybe helping along with spreading what you know into the communities, how would they reach you?
A couple of different ways. I'm on LinkedIn, Shelley Dival, and my website, enablingspaces.com.au. There's all the contact details and contact form on that. And if they're really keen, they can actually pick up the phone and call me.
People do that still?
Well, sometimes, yes, they do.
You mean you can talk in those things? I'll be darned.
You can. I know. It's really, really great how technology has put a phone with a camera now. And we can make phone calls from our camera. So.
Well, I will take and put those details of how to contact you down into the show notes so that people don't have to sit here on the last bit of the podcast and go forward and backward 16 times to get the website exactly spelled right.
Yeah. And look, if they download my report from that website, then all my contact details and the Facebook page and everything's in that as well.
Perfect. I so much appreciate your taking the time to chat with us tonight and share some of your experience and just, your glimpse into, as I say, life in the neurotypical world when there's another world out there. We hope that you've enjoyed another episode of Life in a Neurotypical Universe. Please, if you enjoyed this, share it with your friends. Go take their phone and subscribe them. Heck, it will help us all out. If you want to know more about neurodiversity or have any questions for me, you can reach me at my website, timgoldstein.com, where I'll be more than glad to help you as best I can to navigate through the neurotypical universe.